Welcome to monobiology. Today we're going to do the second part of our speciation lesson. In the last lesson, we looked at particular barriers that prevent species, different species that is, from mating with one another or from producing fertile offspring. In this section, we're going to look a little bit about how a species may separate itself from another species. In other words, we're going to look at the modes of speciation. The two most important modes of speciation that we're going to look at are called allopatric and sympatric. There are two other modes as well, and they're called peripatric and parapatric. And as you can see, they're slightly different ones in the middle here. These are the two most common ones, and they're the ones we're going to focus on. However, these two do exist as well. Let's start with allopatric speciation. Allopatric speciation. This occurs when populations are segregated by geographic barriers. For instance, they could be separated by oceans or mountain ranges. This type of speciation is most likely to occur to a small population on the fringe of a larger population. This small population has a much better chance of having a different gene pool than the larger population. Sorry about the typo, that should say than the larger population. Because of the difference in genes, another little typo, that should be genes as in like genetics, this small population will have different selection factors than the larger population. Wow, I probably should have edited this before. I used the voiceover for this, and apparently the voiceover didn't hear me clearly, so I'll fix that later on. Anyway, a couple of typos on this one. Forgive me. Okay, so that's allopatric speciation. Now we're going to look at some examples. One in particular, actually, of some stickleback fish and the Panama Canal. Okay, so there are many different types of stickleback fish, and just as an example of how these particular organisms may have separated into different species, I'm going to show you a map here of what is called the Panama Canal. Now, the Panama Canal is basically a human-made canal that goes through South America so that ships don't have to go all the way around South America to get from the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean or the Pacific Ocean over to the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, so it's like a shortcut for ships that are moving long distances and need to get from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. So basically, as you can see here, you've got this area here that cuts right through the continent of South America. Okay? Now, we would have had fish. Here's the Atlantic Ocean over here. Here's the Pacific Ocean. It's kind of twisted around a little bit. Okay? We would have had fish in all these areas. Perhaps fish like this. Notice that some of the fish might have come in here. These fish would now be separated from these fish. They would start to develop perhaps slightly different gene pools. Natural selection would act on them. Over a long period of time, perhaps these organisms would no longer be able to mate with one another. At that point, they are no longer part of the same species, in which case speciation has occurred, i.e., evolution has occurred. Okay, so that's kind of how allopatric speciation could occur. Let's have another quick look at an aerial view of the Panama Canal. Kind of cool, huh? So you've got all these ships coming through. They don't want to go all the way around South America, so they're going to come through here and get from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. Fish are going to come through here too, but not be able to get back out. And over time, they're going to change, and new species are going to evolve from that. The second mode of speciation is called sympatric speciation. This type of speciation occurs when a new species develops within an already existing population. So they're not separated like an allopatric speciation. Essentially, this involves reproductive isolation without the geographic barrier. How would this occur? The most common example in plants is when plants form polyploids. Now, polyploids, if you think back to our discussions on mitosis and meiosis, we know that gametes are haploid, organisms are diploid. Well, a polyploid is when an organism has more than 2 sets of chromosomes. So imagine a human that had more than 2 sets of chromosomes. Now that human probably wouldn't live. But in plants, for whatever reason, they do have the ability to survive if non-disjunction occurs with all of the chromosomes. That's essentially how you get a polyploid. You get a gamete where non-disjunction occurred with all of the chromosomes. Now, think of it this way. As soon as that happens, you've got an entirely new organism, an organism that has a completely different number of chromosomes than the parents do. You've got speciation. Now, whether or not that species survives is a whole other story. Obviously, sometimes they do. And if that happens, we've got sympatric speciation. How does it happen in animals, though? Because polyploidy wouldn't really work in animals. Well, animal groups within a particular population may become fixed on a particular resource that's not commonly used by the parent population. And then over a period of time, they may only mate with each other, which of course will change the gene pool of that in-group of animals, that subpopulation of animals. Let me give you a more specific example. So here's an example of sympatric speciation from a lab. Initially, we have some fruit flies here who are all the same species. We take from that population a small section that we only feed starch to. We take also from that original population a small population that we only feed maltose to, which is another type of sugar. We let 8 or more generations pass, and now we have 2 subpopulations of fruit flies who will no longer mate with one another. These guys will only eat starch, and these guys will only eat maltose, and they will not mate with one another. They'll only mate with other fruit flies who eat the same as them, starch or maltose. They won't mate with the other subpopulation. So here's your little joke here, Dan. We've got the fruit fly trying to hit on this fruit fly and says, "What's your sign?" And I'm assuming it's a girl, but I guess it could be a guy. Anyway, he or she says, "Bug off. I wouldn't mate with a maltose eater if I were the last starch-eating fruit fly on the planet." So it just highlights the fact that over time that can happen. So we had an original population. We only fed this one this, and we only fed this one this. There we go. And so that's how sympatric speciation can occur. It can occur in the lab, and it can probably occur in nature. Right, so that in a nutshell is, or are, the 2 modes of speciation. Make sure you take notes on this. There should be spaces there to fill in. And also, bring your questions to class, as always. These are the references for the pictures, which I am now required by law to offer.